Chapter 21. Kath was still staring after the Jabberwock, the stick clutched in her shaking hands, when a shadow of feathers and bells dropped from the sky. Jest grabbed her shoulders. His gloves carried the memory of soft quills before they were leather once more. "Are you all right?" he asked, breathless. No, she stammered. Her eyes were full of the horizon and the memory of the lion's body, all grace and muscle, so quickly taken, so easily defeated. Hatta was there too. Then, in the corner of her vision, "Come," he ordered, shoving the two of them toward the forest. "Let's get to safety, in case the beast comes back." "The lion," Kath's voice cracked with a sob. "I know," said Hatta. "I saw." Hatta ushered her past Hare, whose eyes were glistening with tears. She heard the raven's wings beating behind them. She spotted the turtle's shell past the crossroads door. Everyone was waiting for them on the other side, clustered together on the black and white tiles. Their brightened eyes began to turn away when they realized that one of their party had been lost. The crossroads felt too quiet, too ordinary, too safe after the horrors of the glen. "He's gone," Kath stammered. He saved me." "He was a king among beasts," said Jest. It sounded like a memoriam. "Was indeed," said Hatta. "Some might call that a checkmate." Kath put up no argument when Jest offered to take her home, though there was a sense of protection in the crossroads when its mismatched doors and access to all corners of the kingdom. As soon as they stepped onto the shores of Squeaky Creek, Kath felt the same terror wash over her. Hearts was not safe. The Jabberwock was real, and it was here, and they were not safe. "My lady," said Jest, his voice heavy. They had hardly spoken once the other guests had scattered and headed for their own homes. Even Raven had seemed happy to abandon them, flying off into some unknown corner of Hearts. "I am so very, very sorry. I put you in danger. You had no control over the Jabberwock." She stopped and turned to face him. The creek burbled behind her. "Did you?" Their hands were intertwined and had been the entire walk, but it didn't seem as romantic as it had when they had left her home area that evening. Rather, there was a need pulsing through her fingertips, for touch, for security. She felt safe with him there, whether or not it was warranted. "If not for me," said Jest, "you would have been safe in your bed and wouldn't have had to witness something so dreadful." She looked down at their fingers, hers so pale against the black leather of his glove. "Perhaps tomorrow, when my senses are clear, I will feel that the whole night was a mistake, but I don't feel that way now." She took in a long breath and raised her eyes again. "Monsters notwithstanding, I enjoyed my first real tea party." A ghost smile flickered at the corners of his mouth. "And I enjoyed taking you to one, monsters notwithstanding." "Then let us not end our night with talk of dreadful things," she said, and though there was a sting of guilt at her words, how could she dismiss what had become of the brave and gallant lion? It was refreshing to think back on the music and the hats and the tea that had come before. "As it pleases you, my lady," said Jest, and he too seemed willing to think of more pleasant things. He tugged her up the bank of the creek. "I didn't have a chance to compliment your performance. The macarons were marvelous, just as you said." She pressed her lips against a proud smile and shrugged. "Why, thank you, Sir Joker." "Where did you learn to bake?" She considered the question. Baking had been a part of her life for so long, It was difficult remembering a time when she hadn't enjoyed digging her fingers into a bowl of cake batter or warm raisin dough. Our cook started teaching me when I was a child, but mostly I taught myself using what recipe books I could find and experimenting from there. I like the idea of taking ingredients that are unappetizing on their own, chalky flour and oily egg whites and bitter dark chocolates, and making something irresistible with them. This might sound mad, but sometimes it feels as though the ingredients are speaking to me. She flushed. Which must be nonsense. I'd rather enjoy nonsense. What else can you make? Most anything once I've seen a recipe for it. Pies, tarts, biscuits, seed cakes, even... Do you think Mr. Raven would care for one of those? I noticed he didn't seem tempted by the macarons. She hesitated and cast a suspicious look at Jest from the corner of her eye. Or would you like a seed cake? I am not yet certain whether you're more man or bird. Jest laughed. Unfortunately, if Raven were to sample your seed cakes and find that he enjoyed them, it might ruin his impeccable ability to brood. One of his fingertips traced the back of Kath's hand. As for me, I trust I would like most anything you made, if the macarons are any indication. She risked a bashful glance at him. Jest returned the look before continuing. The king mentioned some tarts you brought to the ball. I didn't give it much thought at the time. I'd assumed your cook had been the one to make them, but now I understand why he's so drawn to you. You aren't only talented, but do you know you're extra beautiful when you talk about baking? You know you're good at it, and that knowledge lights you up. Kath's defenses shivered, and she had to look away, flattered and flustered, and newly miserable. She hadn't thought of the king all night, what with Jest and the party and what had come afterward. He was no longer simply the king, though. He was her suitor. Now that the evening was at its end, no longer full of potential and impossibilities, her decisions seemed unbearably foolish. What could she be thinking, sneaking about with the court joker? Her parents would be mortified if they found out. Her reputation would be ruined. It's only a silly hobby, she muttered as they turned onto the drive of Rochester Cove Manor. Her heels were loud on the cobblestones, so she tried to stay on her toes. Jest, on the other hand, walked like falling snowflakes. It's nice to be good at something, though. It's not what my parents wanted me to be good at, but it's something, she sighed. Whereas you seem to be good at everything. Not everything, he said. Would you believe I've never so much as held an egg beater? Scandalous! He grinned at her, and she was surprised at how much she wanted to tell him about the bakery she and Marianne were going to open. The desire to bring him into her fantasy was fast and fervent, maybe even to tell him of how she'd begun to dream of him being a part of it all. But she and Marianne hadn't told anyone about their plans, other than the Duke, which had been necessary. And to tell Jest felt like it would have been a betrayal of her oldest friendship. That alone held her tongue. You don't have to walk me all the way to the house, she said, realizing that her feet were dragging more with every step. Stuff and nonsense. After the night we've had, I couldn't imagine deserting you before you've been seen safely to your door or window. Catherine was unwilling to argue. They cut across the grass, damp and soft from dew. Morning dew. The whole night had been veiled away, yet it seemed as if she had just left. Her gaze traced the boughs of the lemon tree to her bedroom window. The glass was black as pitch. hearth fire had burned down hours ago. I suppose now you're going to grow wings and fly us up there. Unfortunately, my wings come only in one size, and they wouldn't be helpful in this circumstance. His jaw clenched, his yellow eyes raw with uncertainty. You ask if I was man or bird, Lady Pinkerton, but I'm neither. He drew in a long breath and turned to face her fully. I'm a rook, as is Raven. She tilted her head. Isn't a rook a type of bird? In hearts, perhaps. His fingers tightened around hers. But in chess, we are protectors of the White Queen. She held his gaze, trying to puzzle through his words, unsure if this was another riddle. Chess? His head shifted in what could have been a nod. That's where Raven and I come from. Chess. The world was little more than a breath now, spoken with awe. Chess, the land of the red and white queendoms. She had never known anyone from Chess. There were rumors that one could travel between the two lands, but there was a maze that no one knew how to get to, and a doorway said to be guarded by fate itself. But such rumors could all be fairy tales, as far as she knew. If you're a protector of the White Queen, she said, whatever are you doing here? It's complicated. He seemed to be fighting with an explanation. The Queen sent us here on a mission of sorts, one that could determine the fate of Chess, one that could end the war between her and the Red Queen, a war that is as old as time himself. Kath gaped at him, wondering how there ever could have been a time when she had looked at this man and seen only a joker, all pranks and magic. He was from Chess. He was on a mission that could end a war. He was the protector of a queen. Her heart suddenly twisted, and she was surprised at how much it hurt. Then, how long will you be in Hearts? She asked, and not caring how the unexpected sorrow showed in her question. Jess's eyes widened with surprise, then softened. He settled his free hand onto their entwined fingers, encasing hers completely. I don't know. Once our mission is complete, perhaps I'll have a reason to come back and to stay. Won't... Her voice caught, and she had to clear her throat to continue. Won't your queen need you? She appointed some replacement rooks in our absence. His gaze shifted to some spot over Kath's shoulder, and he frowned. Bizarre little men, the Twiddles, always fighting over a rattle, but I suppose they fit the role well enough. Maybe she won't need me anymore, or Raven. He looked back and said, with more hesitation, if I had a reason to stay, that is. Naturally, her lips had dried, and she licked them instinctively. Jess inhaled and dropped her hand. Taking half a step back, he rubbed the back of his neck. I apologize, Lady Pinkerton. I've kept you out too long. No, She folded her hands against her stomach, wondering how her fingers had gotten so cold so quickly. Thank you for telling me your story. I promise your secret will be safe with me. She hesitated. Or at least, I think it's a secret. Does the king know? No one knows. Only you, and Raven, of course, and Hatta, and Heyer. Her eyes widened. Are they from Chess too? Jest rocked on his heels. Of a sort, but their secrets are not mine to tell. She nodded in understanding, although her curiosity gnawed at her inside. Anyhow, being the protecting sort, my job won't be finished until you are returned to your chambers. Jess took off his three-pointed hat and set it on her head. Hold that, if you would. I should have known the hat would play a role. Actually, it just gets in the way. Besides, I was right. It does look better on you. Reaching overhead, Jess grabbed on to a low-hanging branch and pulled himself into the tree. Catherine backed up to peer into the shadows. He was pleasant to watch, so nimble and fast. Crouching on a low bough, he held his hand toward her. Now give me your hand. She traced the limbs of the tree up to her window, apprehensive. Have you run out of magic? Some things, like climbing trees, are best done without. Your hand, my lady. She twisted her mouth to one side. You don't understand. I'm not like you. His hand started to sag. Like me? Graceful, strong. Jess's expression warmed. You might be surprised how often I'm compared to a walrus, actually. And walruses do not climb trees. At this, his growing smile vanished. He hesitated, momentarily speechless, before retracting his hand. Of all the nonsense I've heard tonight, that's the worst of it. But suit yourself. He straddled the tree branch, his boots kicking at the air. Go ahead and use the front door, if you prefer. I'll wait here. Kath pressed the hat down tighter to her head and scanned the tree branches again. She considered his proposal and could already hear the loud squeak of the front door that she'd been hearing all her life. Huffing, she held her arms up toward him. His grin returned, and he shifted into a more stable position. A flash of panic flickered through Kath's mind as he latched onto her wrists. What if she was too heavy for him to lift? But moments later, Jess was pulling her up without any apparent difficulty. He waited until he was sure she had her footing and one hand clasped around a branch before he let go. The climb was easier than she expected, though Jess was doing most of the work. He instructed her where to place her hands, which branches to grab hold of, how best to leverage her weight. It felt like being a child again, scrambling through the trees, making believing she had been born into a family of chimpanzees. She had to stifle her laughter so she wouldn't wake anyone in the house. Her bedroom window was still open. Jess stepped inside before turning to help her over the gap. It was the most daring part, trusting that her legs could span the distance, and she had to hold her breath until her toes were on the windowsill, and Jess's hands were on her waist, pulling her across. Catherine gasped and fell into him, hat bells jingling. Jess's arms encircled her, and he turned, catching her mid-fall. Kath found herself hanging in his arms, her fingers digging into his shoulders, one foot still on the windowsill, and the other scraping against the carpet. Her heartbeat danced between them, and a tea-drunk giggle threatened to intrude into the chilly quiet of the morning. Jess was grinning, and though it was too dark to see the color of his eyes, she could picture exactly what shade they were. Gulping, she removed the hat and returned it to Jess's head. "Thank you," she murmured, hoping he knew it wasn't just for helping her up the tree and through the window. Hoping he knew it was for everything, the thrills, the laughs, the secrets he'd shared. The night may have had moments of panic and terror, but it had also been an entire night when she didn't have to be the daughter of a marquess. He didn't set her down, didn't let her go. "When will I see you again?" he whispered. A tickle erupted in her stomach. He wanted to see her again. Happiness coursed to the ends of her limbs. She could be his reason to stay in Hearts. She wanted to be. But with that thought, the gut-deep ache of her situation returned full force. In Hearts, he was not a rook. He was a court joker. and she was being courted by the king. Kath planted both feet on the floor and extricated herself from his hold. He didn't try to stop her, perhaps the worst disappointment of all. She propped herself against a rose-covered bedpost, her legs still shaky. "We can't," she said before amending. "I can't." His dimples faded. She tried again. "Tonight was magnificent, marvelous, magical, but also horrible and dangerous. Tonight can't happen again." His half-smile quirked, more sardonic this time. "I know, that is the way of time." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, you should go." She was painfully aware of how easily their voices could gather through the walls. Soon, Marianne would come to light the fire and fill the wash basin. Geste had to leave, and he couldn't ever come back to her window again. And she could never admit to anyone this night had happened. She had been to a real tea party. She had made friends who weren't in the gentry. She had narrowly escaped death and watched the poor lion being carried away into the night. But she could never speak of these things. She too had a secret now to keep. "Perhaps I'll see you at the Turtle Days festival," said Geste, "if not more of His Majesty's garden parties." His tone was light, but it felt forced, clinging to optimism. Kath shrugged, growing more tense by the moment. "I'll be at the festival. It's my family's festival after all." Surprised, Geste glanced around the room, taking in the elaborate crown moldings and silver candlesticks and tape-striped bed curtains. "That's right," he murmured. "You're the daughter of the Marquess." As if he'd forgotten. "It's tradition that I start the dancing. I'll be dancing the lobster quadrille. I expect I'll be dancing with the king." She stuck out her tongue in distaste. Geste's expression brightened. "As I expect, I'll be performing for him." He stuck his tongue out to mimic her. One of her embarrassing snorts escaped, unveiled, and Catherine buried her face in her hands. "What if—" Geste started. She lowered her hands. He had taken a step closer to her. "You dance your lobster quadrille, and I'll juggle some clams, and we'll both pretend to be hidden away in a secret sea cave, where we don't have to think about courtships or royal missions or anything but ourselves." "That does sound lovely," she said, struggling to remember why this was a bad idea. Everything about him was a bad idea, and yet... "Then I will see you at the festival?" She started to shake her head, to be firm in her stance that this, whatever this was, could not continue past this night, this morning, this very moment. "Geste," his eyebrows lifted, and he looked pleased at the intimacy of his name. No misters, no sirs. "You should go," she stammered. As if she'd summoned them, footsteps sounded outside her door. Kath spun around. The knob jiggled. There was a soft thump behind her and the crackle of leaves. She glanced back, and Geste was gone.